Hi all, welcome to the video lecture series of object-oriented programming. In this video lecture, we'll be discussing about working with files. These are the topics that we would like to discuss in this video lecture. We will see what is file handling in Java, what are the different methods available to handle files in Java, then different file operations, and then we will conclude. First of all, what do we mean by file handling in Java? That is what we are going to discuss first. File handling means both reading from and writing data into a file. In Java, we have a class named file, which is inside the package named IO, which allows us to handle files of different formats. Since file is a class, if you want to use the methods inside the class, we need to create the objects of that class and then specify the name of the file that we have to open. So we will see one example of opening a file. In this example, as mentioned earlier, you can see the import statement here because the file class is actually inside the package named IO. So we have to import that class first of all because it is another package, and then we are using that class in our program. So we need to import that class first of all. Then we have to create the object of that class. So for creating the object of class file, we have to write class name space object name equal to new and the constructor. And for opening a file or for working with file, we need to open the file first of all. So when we call the constructor of class file, when we create the object, we have to pass the name of the file as the input or as the parameter. So here we are trying to open a file named file name. We have to mention the extension also along with the file name. So here we are trying to open a text file. Now we know that there exists a class named file which is used to handle files in Java. So since it's a class, there will be some methods inside the class. We are going to see the methods inside the class named file in Java. This table summarizes the different methods available inside the file class in Java. We'll go one by one. Can read. This is the method name and this is the return type. So here it mentioned as boolean. That means this method returns a boolean value. So it will be either true or false. So here's the explanation for that method. So can read, as the name indicates, it's clear from the name itself that this method checks whether the file is readable or not. If it is readable, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. Similarly, can write. This method also returns true if we can write into that file. If it is not possible to write, then it returns false. Then create new file. To create a new file at a particular location, we can use this method. This method also returns a boolean value. So this method tries to create a new file, new empty file. If it is successful, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. Similarly, if you want to delete a file, we have to use the delete method. This method also returns a true or false values. So if it is possible to delete the file, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. Suppose we want to check whether a particular file exists or not, we have to use the method exist. So in this case, this method will check whether a file exists or not. If it exists, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. Then get name. What's the meaning of those two words, get name? To get the name, right? So this method is used to get the name of the file. So here the return type is string. So this method returns the name of the file as a string. Then get absolute path. I hope you know the difference. I hope you know the meaning of path of a file, isn't it? When we look at the address bar of a folder, we can see c:/ folder name / file. That is the path. Suppose we want to know the location of a file, where it is located actually. We need to get the path of that file. To get the path of a file, we have to use get absolute path. So this method also returns a string. Okay. Then length method, this method is used to get the size of the file in terms of bytes. Okay. Then list, this method is used to create an array of files in the directory. Suppose we created a file object such that we give the parameter as a path to directory. In such case, if we use this method list, it will create an array of files in that directory. And if you want to make a new directory, we can make use of mkdir method. This term mkdir you might have heard about. We have used this in our Linux as well as in our command prompt to create directories. Okay, so this method also returns either true or false depending upon whether the creation of directory was successful or not. And always remember, all these methods are inside the class file. So if you want to access any of these methods, we need to create the object of class file first, then that object name dot these method names. That is how we have to access these methods. Similar to the way by which we access the methods inside a class. First of all, we have to create the object, then object name dot variable name or object name dot method name. Similarly, these files are inside the class file, so we have to use the object of class file to access these methods. So suppose I'm creating an object, a file obj1 equal to new file, and I'm mentioning a file name inside that constructor. So actually I'm creating a pointer to that, not a pointer, I'm creating a reference to that file. So now my object named object1, it's actually pointing to that file. So object1 dot can read, it's actually checking whether the file referred by the object object1 is readable or not. Similarly, all these methods has to be accessed by using this object name. Now we will see the different file operations that is possible. Mainly there are 4 operations on a file. They are as follows. First one is to create a file. We need to create a file first of all, then only we can perform all the operations on it, or else we have to perform the operations on the existing file. Anyway, creation of a file is one of the operations. Second one is to get the file information. That means whether the file is readable or whether the file is writable, then the length of the file, etc. All those things are known as file information. Then write to a file. If we have some contents that we have to insert into a file, we have to write it to a file. That's one of the operation. And finally, read from a file. So we have a file and the file consists of some data. Suppose we want to read that contents from a file into a program, we have to perform this operation. So these are the 4 basic operations in Java. They are creation of a file, getting the file information, writing into a file, and reading from a file. We will start with the first operation on a file, that is to create a file. To create a file in Java, we need to use the create new file method, which is found inside the class file. We know the explanation of the working of this method, that is, this method returns either true or false depending upon whether the file creation was successful or not. If this method was able to create a file, then it returns true, otherwise it returns false. False means if the file already exists or if it was not possible to create the file. In both cases, this method will return false. We will see an example now. We have imported the file class, then we have imported java.io.io exception, because when we try to create or work with files, this is one kind of the exception that may arise, so we have imported it. And we have started one class, then the main method. Always the functionings or the operations that we perform on a file, we have to include that in a try catch block. Since we have not discussed about exceptions so far, don't give too much focus on it. Try and catch, they are something related to exceptions, so it will be clear when we discuss about exceptions. So for the time being, just understand that when we deal with files, there may there may occur some kind of exceptions, some kind of errors. So if you want to handle such errors, we have to use try catch block. All the statements that may cause an error will be included inside the try block. Okay, and catch block, as the name indicates, it catches the error that happens inside the try block. I hope you get a vague idea about try catch block. That's enough for the time being. So see this line of code, file my object equal to new file. So here we are giving a path. Inside the D drive, I'm going to create a new file which is of type text file. So we can also give path like this. Instead of giving the file name alone, we can also mention the path of the file in which we have to create the file inside the constructor of the class file. So in this line of code, my obj is the object name of class file. This is the constructor, and this is the path in which we have to create the file, and name the file as file handling new file f1.txt. So we are checking whether my obj dot create new file, that is whether this file was possible to create or not. Okay, if my obj dot create new file, so this file, when we call this method, it will create the new file with the name specified here at this location. Okay, if it was possible, then this method returns true. So inside this if parenthesis, this my obj dot create new file will become either true or false. So we know how this if else is working. If statement will work only if it is true, right? So if my obj dot create new file, the value returned by this method is true, then this line will get printed. Okay, if this method returns false, the value inside this pair of parentheses will be false. So if false, that means the if statement will not work, it will jump to else. So this line will be executed. Okay, that means if this file created a new file as mentioned here, this method will return true, and this will be the output that we are going to get. So see, we have used the get name method also here. My obj is the object of class file, and we have used the method get name also to get the name of the file that we created. Here we have mentioned the name of the file already. So if this file was created during this stage or during this line of code, when we executed this line, we'll get the name of the file that we have mentioned here. I hope it's clear to you. So here my obj is actually a reference to the file that we are going to create, and the file will be created when we call create new file method. If that file creation was successful, this method will return true. Thus this if statement becomes true, then this line of code will be executed. If create new file was not able to create the file, or if a file exists there already with the same name, then this if statement becomes false, then the control will jump to the else block, and this line of code will be executed. The second file operation is to get the file information. So file information includes the name of the file, the length of the file, whether the file is readable or not, whether we can write to the file or not, etc. So we'll see an example directly. As mentioned earlier, we have to import the file class, we have to create the object of class file, then see whether we are checking whether the file that we are referring to, whether the file exists or not, by using the method exist of class file. This method will be returning either true or false. So if the method returns true, then this statement will be executed. Okay, then if and only if the file exists, then only we can get the name, then we can get the absolute path, then we can check whether we can write to the file or not, we can check whether we can read the file or not, we can get the length of the file also. So these are different file informations: name of the file, path of the file, checking whether it is writable or not, checking whether it is readable or not, then length, size of the file. Okay, So exist means this method returns true if and only if the file that we are referring to is exist or not. If it does not exist, it will return false. So here, if it returns false, then none of these statements will be executed because all these are inside the if statement. So if it is returning false, it will jump to the else block and this line will be executed. So we'll see a sample output. So file name, that means this line we'll be getting the name of the file. Then absolute path means the location at which the file is located. Then whether it's writable or not, we are getting it as true. All these things, file name, absolute path, all these terms are we are getting the output because we have mentioned here inside the double quotes. Okay, file name in double quotes in system.out.println. That is why we are getting the term file name here. Don't think that these are also returned by this method. GetName method returns only the name of the file, that is this portion. Similarly, getAbsolutePath returns only the path of the file, that is from D to this txt. Similarly, canWrite and canRead returns either true or false, and myObj.length returns the size of the file in bytes. So these are the different methods that I can use to get the file in. The third file operation is to write to a file. To write some contents into a file, we have to make use of the FileWriter class together with its write method. We will see an example right now. So to write something into a file, we need to use the FileWriter class, which is also inside the java.io package. So we need to import that class first of all. Then I told you about IO exception. Then we are creating a class, then we are starting the main method, then try catch block. See, we are creating the object of FileWriter class because we need to use the method write inside the class FileWriter. If we need to access a method named write inside the class FileWriter, we need to create the object of that class. So we are creating that object here, FileWriter the class name, then myWriter is the object name equal to new, and the constructor again we have to give the file name or the absolute path or path of the file that we need to open so that we can write it. Then we start writing by using myWriter, which is the object of class FileWriter, and we call the write method. Okay, and then we are giving the content to be written inside that file. So here one double quotes is missing here. We have to include the double quotes here. We have closed the double quotes, but we have to open the double quotes at the beginning. Okay, so this is how we use the write method of FileWriter class to write something into the file. First of all, create the object of FileWriter, and we have to specify the path or the name of the file that we have to open so that we can write it. Then call the method named write, which is inside the class FileWriter. Then give the contents to be written into the file as the parameter to that method. Then we have closed the file. We have closed the FileWriter. So myWriter.close means we are writing the FileWriter. Then these are something related to exceptions. The last operation on a file is to read some contents from a file. So we will see an example directly. So as mentioned earlier, as we have seen in the previous examples, we have to import the file class which is inside the java.io package. Then this is the exception that we have to import. Then we have to import the scanner class that we have seen in the input output basic section. That is how to read input from a keyboard using scanner class. There are three ways by which we can read input from a console. They are buffered reader, scanner class, and console class. So the same scanner class we can use the same scanner class to read data from a file. So we will see how it is done. So create the main method, write the main method, then create the object of class file like this. We have to mention the path or name of the file that we have to read as the parameter of the constructor. Then we are creating one scanner class object. So scanner myReader equal to new scanner. Instead of giving system.in, we have to mention the file class object. If we want to read the input from the keyboard, we have to use system.in because keyboard is our standard input stream. Suppose we want to read data from somewhere else, we have to mention that path or that source as the input to the scanner constructor. So in this example, we are trying to read some contents from the file. So we have to give the object that refers to that file as the parameter to the scanner class constructor. So now our scanner object myReader is linked with the file to which myObj is referred to. So now myReader is ready to read or write contents to it. Okay, so now we are using the method hasNextLine. Remember here, myReader is actually the object of class scanner. So myReader.hasNextLine means this method is actually inside the class scanner. So we are using the object of class scanner to access one method inside it. This method returns either true or false. This method is used to check whether there exists any content to read or not. Okay, so is there any content to read further? This method will return true. So this is a loop. So this loop will iterate as long as there are contents inside the file. Then we are reading the data from the file and we are storing it in the variable named data, and we are reading the data from the file in the form of a string. That is why we have used the string variable here, and we have used the method nextLine of the scanner class to read the data. So scanner object myReader.nextLine reads one line from the file to which myObj is referring to, and that content will be stored inside the variable data. Then we are printing it. This loop will iterate as long as this hasNextLine method returns true. That means this loop will iterate as long as there are contents inside the file. When the contents in the file inside the file is over, this method will return false, thus the while loop terminates. And then we are closing the scanner class object, and these are something related to exceptions that we will see later. We shall conclude now. It was a lengthy video, somewhat nearly 25 minutes is there, but we discussed very important topic, that is what do we mean by file handling in Java, how to create files in Java, and different operations that we can perform on files, and how to use the methods inside the file class. You can expect UNSC questions based on writing data into a file, or reading content from a file and displaying it, or copying the content of one file to the other. So for all those questions you need to know these file operations, and please go through the examples that we have discussed so that the concept is clear, and you have to be very thorough with the usage of all those methods. That's all in this video lecture. Thank you so much.